You've felt it before, that sudden tightening in your chest, that quiet whisper inside your mind telling you, be careful, that instant discomfort that made you pull back, walk away, say no. You called it intuition. You called it discernment. You called it a gift from God. And maybe sometimes it was, but maybe sometimes it wasn't. Maybe sometimes it was something much older, something that wasn't born from wisdom, but from survival. And that's not a bad thing. It doesn't mean you failed. It doesn't mean you're broken. It simply means you're human. Because what we call intuition isn't always pure instinct. Sometimes it's the echo of a time we were hurt, a memory so deeply etched into our body and soul that even now, without thinking, we move to protect ourselves. It happens so quickly, you don't even notice. You meet someone, and something feels off. You step into a room, and your stomach clenches. You hear a certain tone in someone's voice, and your heart races. Not because there's real danger, but because it reminds you of something your mind hasn't forgotten, even if you can't name it. And in that moment, you believe you're sensing something spiritual. But sometimes, you're sensing something historical. A wound, a memory, a trauma response that kept you safe once, and now shows up even when you're already safe. That's not shameful. That's survival. It's the miracle of how your body protected you when no one else did. It's the beauty of how your heart tried to build walls when it didn't know how to build bridges yet. It's the tenderness of your soul saying, I never want to be hurt like that again. And for that, you deserve compassion, not judgment. Because so many of us were never taught the difference between trauma and intuition. We were never told that fear can feel holy, that anxiety can masquerade as warning, that pain can speak in the same language as discernment. And so, without realizing, we began confusing the two. We started calling every discomfort a sign from God to run. We started labeling every emotional trigger as spiritual wisdom. We started making decisions not from peace, but from old fears dressed up as protection. Not because we're manipulative, not because we're self-sabotaging, but because we're still healing. And healing doesn't happen by shaming ourselves for our confusion. Healing begins when we learn to pause and ask, is this the voice of God? Or is this the voice of my old wounds trying to keep me safe? Because true spiritual intuition, the kind that flows from a healed place, feels different than trauma responses. It doesn't demand. It doesn't rush. It doesn't flood you with anxiety. It doesn't terrify you into obedience. True discernment feels quiet, grounded, sure. It feels like the gentle nudge of peace, not the urgent shout of fear. And that's how you begin to tell the difference. Not by dismissing your feelings, not by shaming yourself for being sensitive, but by getting curious, with compassion. Is this warning protecting my growth? Or is it just protecting my fear? Because growth will sometimes feel uncomfortable, but it won't make you feel unsafe. And safety will sometimes feel unfamiliar, especially if your history taught you that chaos was normal. The journey back to true intuition, the journey back to the pure voice of God inside you, doesn't start with effort. It starts with healing. It starts with honoring your story. It starts with thanking the parts of you that learned how to survive. And it starts with gently teaching your heart that it no longer has to live in constant defense. You're not under threat anymore. You don't have to brace for impact every time something feels new. You're allowed to breathe. You're allowed to pause. You're allowed to ask, is this fear or is this faith? And even if you can't always tell the difference yet, that's okay. Because healing isn't about getting it perfect. Healing is about returning to yourself, one small, tender moment at a time. In the next part, we'll explore the beauty of how your body, mind, and spirit were designed to protect you, and how learning to listen with love, not fear, can restore the bridge between your emotions and the true voice of discernment that's been waiting for you all along. Because you don't have to distrust yourself forever. You don't have to live in constant suspicion of your feeling. You were created not just to survive life's dangers, you were created to thrive in life's sacred invitations. And that begins when you start hearing your own heart clearly, not through the filter of fear, but through the healing whisper of love. There's something profoundly beautiful and profoundly human about the way your soul tries to protect you. Long before you had the language to describe it, your body knew how to recognize danger. Long before you could understand emotional wounds, your nervous system learned how to react. It wasn't a flaw, it was survival. And maybe no one ever paused to tell you that. Your body, your heart, your emotions, they were never against you. Even when they seem confusing now, they were always doing their best to protect you. When you froze in fear as a child to avoid punishment, when you shrank yourself to avoid being noticed by someone unsafe, when you withdrew emotionally because opening up only ever led to pain, that wasn't failure. That was wisdom in its earliest, most raw form. The wisdom of a soul learning how to endure when it didn't yet know how to heal. And that survival wisdom, that instinct to protect yourself, didn't just vanish when you grew up. It stayed with you, quietly, hidden under the surface. It became the lens through which you interpreted moments, people, opportunity, even spiritual experience. Not because you wanted to live guarded, but because some part of you still needed to feel safe. And when we talk about intuition, this is where it gets tender. Because when you've lived most of your life in survival mode, your intuition often feels like a heightened sense of alertness. You catch the smallest changes in someone's tone. You notice the slightest shift in energy when you walk into a room. You hear what isn't said. You feel what others are trying to hide. And you think, I'm discerning. I'm gifted with intuition. And you are. But sometimes, what you're discerning isn't the spirit of the room. Sometimes, it's the echoes of your past, projecting fear into places where love is actually trying to reach you. It's important to honor both truths at once. Your sensitivity is real. Your pain is real. Your discernment is real. But unhealed pain can confuse the signals. Pain sharpens perception, but it distorts interpretation. What feels like danger might just be discomfort from growth. What feels like a threat might actually be an opportunity. What feels like rejection might be unfamiliarity with true acceptance. Because when you've spent years on high alert, even peace can feel suspicious at first. Even goodness can feel threatening. Because your body learned, if it feels calm, it's probably a trap. And now, healing invites you into a new lesson. Not everything that feels unfamiliar is unsafe. Not every uncomfortable emotion is a sign to run. Not every stirring inside you is a warning to flee. Some are invitations to heal, but it takes time to retrain the heart. Time to learn how to stay present when everything inside you wants to brace. Time to discern the difference between the voice of your history and the voice of the spirit. And healing doesn't ask you to rush that process. Healing says, it's okay if it still feels confusing. It's okay if you don't always know right away. It's okay if sometimes you mistake fear for wisdom. Because that confusion doesn't disqualify you, it invites you deeper, into gentleness, into patience, into rebuilding trust, not just with God, but with yourself. You don't heal from survival mode by shaming yourself for it. You heal by honoring it, then gently teaching yourself another way. A way where fear no longer makes all the decision. A way where your body is not an enemy to conquer, but a messenger to listen to. A way where your past doesn't have to keep being the narrator of your present. Because your body learned how to protect you. But now, your spirit can lead you further. And your spirit is not fueled by fear. Your spirit is anchored in love. Love that says you don't have to run from every feeling. Love that says you don't have to armor up every time you get close to someone. Love that says the old alarms are just that, old. They served you once, but you are no longer living in the battlefield they were trained for. You are in a new place now, and your discernment, the real, healed, anchored discernment, is being reawakened, not to keep you small, not to trap you in suspicion, but to lead you into fullness, fullness of connection, fullness of joy, fullness of peace that feels safe, not suspicious. And it starts simply by noticing. Noticing when your heart races without clear reason. Noticing when your first instinct is to pull away. Noticing when your mind jumps to worst-case scenarios, even when nothing in front of you warrants it. And instead of criticizing yourself, you get curious. You ask softly, is this now, or is this then? You invite God into the moment. Help me hear your voice above the voice of my fear. Help me see what's real, not just what I've been trained to expect. And little by little, your intuition begins to clear. Not because you're striving harder, but because you're healing deeper. You're no longer just reacting, you're responding. You're no longer just surviving, you're discerning. And that shift, is the beginning of a life lived not by the echo of old wounds, but by the whisper of true wisdom. In the next part, we'll walk through what the real voice of God sounds like compared to the voice of old fear, and how you can begin to trust again and again that you are not broken. You are being rebuilt for a life where discernment is no longer driven by trauma, but by truth, because your heart was never meant to live on high alert forever. It was made to live at peace. There's a moment in healing where a new question starts to rise from somewhere deep inside you, a question you might not have dared to ask before. How can I tell if it's really God speaking, or just my fear trying to protect me? It's an honest, sacred question, and it's one that doesn't need to be answered with shame or suspicion. It needs to be answered with kindness, because if you were never taught to trust your emotions, if you were conditioned to survive instead of thrive, if you were trained to expect pain more than peace, it makes sense that sometimes your heart confuses the voice of love with the echoes of loss. And that's not your fault. It's the natural human result of living in a world where not everything was safe, where your body learned to stay alert, where your mind learned to scan for danger before it learned to scan for goodness. So first, give yourself grace. You are not failing at spirituality because you can't always tell the difference yet. You're simply healing. And healing clears the clutter around your soul's ability to hear truth. Now, let's walk gently into this. What does the real voice of God sound like compared to the voice of fear? The voice of fear is urgent. It rushes you. It pushes you to act immediately, without reflection. It says, if you don't move now, something terrible will happen. The voice of God is steady. It invites you. It gives you space to breathe, to consider, to move from peace instead of panic. It says, you are safe to wait. You are safe to move slowly. You are safe to trust me. Fear floods your body with anxiety. God fills your heart with clarity. Even if it feels uncomfortable, it's never chaotic. Fear speaks in ultimatums. Do this or else. God speaks in invitations. Walk with me through this. Fear triggers shame. If you were better, you would know exactly what to do. God nurtures courage. Even if you're unsure, I will guide you gently. And perhaps the most profound difference is this. Fear isolates you. It makes you feel alone, unsafe, small. But when God speaks, even correction feels wrapped in connection. Even when He calls you higher, He doesn't leave you stranded. There's always the undercurrent of belonging, of being seen, of being loved, even before you move, even before you answer. That's how you begin to tell. Not by asking yourself if you're emotional, not by measuring how spiritual you feel, but by noticing, does this voice lead me toward fear or toward trust? Does this voice pull me into panic or pull me into presence? Because God's voice doesn't just tell you what to do. It reminds you who you are while you're doing it. Beloved, held, safe. Even if the road ahead is uncertain, even if the feelings are messy, even if the healing is still unfinished, the real voice of God doesn't demand you to be perfectly healed before He speaks to you. He speaks into your healing, right where you are, confused, tender, trying your best. Because He's not waiting for you to fix your instincts before He meets you. He meets you inside them, inside your questions, inside your mixed emotions, inside your trembling yes. And the more you walk with Him, the more your intuition begins to be reshaped, not by fear's alarms, but by love's invitation. You'll notice you pause before reacting. You'll notice you listen to your body without letting it rule your decision. You'll notice you feel a subtle, sacred pull toward peace. Not because there's no fear, but because fear no longer gets the final say. And slowly, gently, your inner landscape starts to change. You begin to trust the process of reflection instead of immediate reaction. You begin to lean into discomfort with curiosity, not dread. You begin to recognize that sometimes the unfamiliar feeling you're having isn't a warning of danger. It's the growing pains of stepping into something beautiful. Because growth, real growth, often feels uncomfortable, but not unsafe. It stretches you, it softens you, it teaches you to stay. even when every old instinct tells you to run. And staying is how you learn to tell the difference. When you stay present long enough to listen, when you stay tender enough to discern, when you stay open enough to be taught, even by your mistakes, you realize God's voice is not hidden behind perfection. It's woven through your humanity. You don't have to get it right to be led by Him. You don't have to silence every emotion to hear Him. You don't have to distrust your whole heart just because part of it is still healing. You simply have to stay in the conversation. Not the conversation with fear, the conversation with love. And love is patient. Love is willing to walk with you while you're learning. Love is willing to repeat the truth over and over again until you believe it. You're not broken. You're not behind. You're not disqualified because you got scared. You're growing. And the more you believe that, the more your own inner voice, your God-given intuition, will begin to echo it back to you. In the next part, we'll explore what healing looks like practically, how you can begin to untangle old trauma responses from new spiritual discernment, and how every small step toward self-trust becomes a step deeper into trusting the heart of God Himself. Because you were never meant to live in confusion forever. You were always meant to walk in clarity, and that clarity is already starting. Right here, right now. Healing doesn't happen by force. It doesn't happen by waking up one morning and deciding that from now on, everything you feel will be perfectly clear, perfectly spiritual, perfectly aligned. It happens by tenderness, by noticing, by choosing to stay connected to yourself, even when old instincts scream otherwise. Because the real work of untangling trauma from true discernment is not about suppressing your reactions. It's about listening to them differently. It's about realizing that your first reaction isn't your final authority. You can feel a surge of fear and still pause. You can sense an old warning bell ringing and still ask, is this fear trying to protect me? Or is it God trying to guide me? You can honor what your body is telling you without letting it dictate your choices. This is the new skill you're learning. Emotional intelligence meets spiritual discernment, and it looks like patience. It looks like sitting with yourself long enough to recognize when fear is trying to lead, and then gently, lovingly recentering your heart toward trust. Not punishing yourself, not shutting yourself down, just noticing and inviting the Spirit of God to help you see more clearly. You might be surprised how quickly clarity grows in an atmosphere of kindness rather than criticism. Because fear shrinks under curiosity, it dissolves under gentleness. Think about it. The parts of you that are most reactive, most sensitive, most quick to pull away, they aren't bad. They are wounded. And wounded parts don't heal through shame. They heal through presence, through having someone, maybe for the first time, stay close enough to say, it's okay. You're safe now. You don't have to protect yourself the way you used to. And that someone, first and foremost, is you. You are the first voice your soul hears. And when your voice becomes more patient, more compassionate, more trusting, your discernment naturally becomes clearer too. This is where the practical shift begins. When you feel that tightening in your chest, instead of immediately labeling it as spiritual warning, you can ask, what does this remind me of? Is this fear based on what's happening now, or something that happened before? Am I sensing danger, or just discomfort? Because this is new and unfamiliar, you can give yourself a moment, a breath, a prayer. God, show me what's true. Help me see through your eyes, not just through the eyes of my old fears. And what you'll begin to notice is breathtaking. Not every alarm inside you needs to be obeyed. Some alarms are old echoes, and you can bless them for trying to protect you, even as you gently let them go. You might start to realize that some things you once ran from were actually invitations. Some people you mistrusted were actually safe. Some opportunities you declined were doorways God had opened, but you were too scared to walk through. And again, none of this realization is to make you feel ashamed. It's to help you heal with hope. Because if old pain could misinterpret reality before, imagine how much more your healed heart will be able to perceive the truth now. Imagine what it will feel like when you no longer have to second-guess every instinct, when you can trust your body's wisdom, trust your intuition, and trust that and your spirit's leading. When you can walk into new spaces without assuming harm is waiting around every corner. That is possible. Not through denial, not through more spiritual striving, but through slow, compassionate reteaching. You teach your heart that it is safe to trust again. Not because everything is guaranteed to be easy, but because you are no longer abandoned inside your own story. You are walking with yourself, not against yourself. You are learning that discernment isn't a frantic scanning for threats. It's a peaceful awareness of truth, and that truth doesn't scream, it doesn't panic, it doesn't manipulate your emotions to make you obey. Truth invites you, truth settles you, truth grounds you, even when it challenges you. And over time, you'll feel it. You'll feel the difference between old fear, dressed up as wisdom, and real wisdom rooted in love. It might be subtle at first. It might look like catching yourself mid-reaction and choosing to breathe instead of bolt. It might sound like a gentler inner voice saying, "Wait, let's see what's really happening." Seat. It might feel like standing your ground, not out of stubbornness, but out of security. And when that happens, when you start moving from healed intuition instead of trauma-driven instinct, it won't just change how you feel internally. It will change your relationships. It will change the doors you walk through. It will change the risks you're willing to take. It will change how you hear God, not as a distant, intimidating figure, but as the patient voice walking beside you. Because that's who He's been all along. He never rushed you. He never condemned you for getting scared. He never abandoned you when you mistook fear for His voice. He stayed. He whispered clarity under the noise of panic. He planted peace under the soil of suspicion. He waited, not for you to get it perfectly right, but for you to feel safe enough to stay open. And now, you're beginning to hear Him more clearly, more gently, more fully. Because as the clutter of old trauma clears, the voice of love grows louder. In the next part, we'll walk into the most beautiful part of this journey. How your healed intuition, once forged by survival, now refined by trust, becomes a sacred compass, not just for avoiding harm, but for navigating toward wholeness, toward joy, toward the life you were always meant to live. Because healing your discernment isn't just about protecting yourself from pain. It's about unlocking your heart's capacity to embrace goodness, fully, freely, and without fear. Healing your discernment is not just about avoiding the traps of the past. It's about opening yourself to the fullness of life you were always meant to walk in. The life where your intuition isn't just a shield against pain, but a compass toward promise. Because when your heart begins to heal, when your old alarms start to quiet, something extraordinary happens. You don't just sense danger anymore. You start sensing possibility. You don't just pick up on threats. You begin to feel the pull of new opportunity, new friendships, new seasons of growth. And you recognize them, not with suspicion, but with hope. And this hope, this new way of sensing, changes everything. You walk into rooms differently. You listen to people differently. You respond to new experiences differently. Instead of bracing for betrayal, you lean into belonging. Instead of scanning for signs of rejection, you start noticing the invitations into deeper connection. Instead of being ruled by the memory of past harm, you start being guided by the reality of present goodness. And that is when discernment becomes not just reactive, but creative. You're not just avoiding hurt. You're creating a life aligned with truth, with love, with peace. A life where the Spirit of God whispers to you, not just about what to avoid, but about what to embrace. Because true discernment isn't a life of constant warning. It's a life of constant welcoming. Welcoming wisdom, welcoming joy, welcoming growth, welcoming the deep, steady sense that you are no longer living out of fear. You are living out of freedom. And here's the beautiful thing. This new discernment doesn't erase your sensitivity. It redeems it. Your sensitivity, once sharpened by survival, becomes softened by trust. You still feel deeply. You still sense shifts in atmosphere. You still pick up the unspoken. But now, instead of assuming the worst, you lean into curiosity. Instead of closing off, you lean in with discernment that is grounded, not frantic. You find yourself asking wiser questions. Is this discomfort because it's wrong? Or because it's stretching me? Is this check in my spirit a warning? or an invitation to grow? Am I feeling fear, or am I feeling the sacred awe of stepping into something new? And you're not asking these questions out of insecurity, and you're asking them out of confidence, because you trust the process now. You trust that healing isn't linear, but it's real. You trust that even if you misread a situation sometimes, you are no longer abandoned to figure it out alone. God is with you, inside your learning, inside your unfolding, inside your growing intuition. And every time you pause instead of panicking, every time you breathe instead of bolting, every time you stay open a little longer than you would have before, you are reclaiming sacred ground inside your own heart. Ground that was once ruled by trauma, now ruled by trust. Ground that was once occupied by fear, now flooded by peace. Ground where you can plant dreams again, without fear they'll be stolen or crushed. Ground where love can take root, not because you're naive, but because you are wise. This is the fruit of healed discernment. You don't just hear warnings anymore. You hear guidance. You hear invitations. You hear the small, still voice of God saying, "It's safe to be open again. It's safe to dream again. It's safe to live, not just survive." And when you start living from that place, from that healed intuition, the world around you changes too. Relationships feel less like battlegrounds and more like gardens. Opportunities feel less like traps and more like open doors. Your inner dialogue stops sounding like an alarm system and starts sounding like a wise guide walking alongside you. You no longer live braced for impact. You live ready for abundance. You're no longer a prisoner of old patterns. You're a partner in creating a life that reflects healing, wholeness, and divine guidance. And the best part? It's not just a one-time moment. It's a rhythm you get to return to over and over. Each time you pause, breathe, ask, and trust, you are weaving a new story into your life. A story where discernment is not a burden, but a blessing. Where intuition is not about avoiding life, but about navigating it with courage and clarity. Where your heart, once guarded out of necessity, now opens freely because it is protected not by walls, but by wisdom. So today, take heart. If you feel scared sometimes, it's okay. If you second-guess yourself sometimes, it's okay. Healing doesn't mean you'll never feel fear again. It means fear no longer gets to sit in the driver's seat. Healing means you walk with fear, but you're led by faith. And faith says, you are safe to move forward. You are wise enough to hear rightly. You are brave enough to stay open to what is good. You are not defined by what hurt you. You are defined by the one who is healing you, even now. This is your time to trust the gentle growth unfolding inside of you, to trust that your discernment is being refined, not erased, and to walk forward, not with suspicion, but with sacred expectancy, because the future that once terrified you might just be the future your heart has been waiting to embrace, and your healed intuition is the key that will unlock it.